Would you like to be a medieval time traveler? What would happen if a 21st century person was dropped into the Middle Ages? The concept of time travel has long captivated the human imagination, from H.G. Wells' The Time Machine to modern cinematic masterpieces like Back to the Future. While these stories often explore the possibilities of venturing into the future, the idea of traveling to the past is equally compelling. Imagine a scenario where a 21st century individual, equipped with all the knowledge, technology, and cultural conditioning of the modern world, is suddenly thrust into the heart of the Middle Ages. The challenges would be manifold, spanning from the immediate shock of medieval life to the complexities of survival, social integration, and the potential for historical influence. Let's engage in a fascinating thought experiment of what might happen if a modern person were dropped into the medieval period, exploring the potential outcomes of such a dramatic displacement. First impressions: the shock of medieval life. The initial moments following the time traveler's arrival in the Middle Ages would likely be marked by a profound sense of disorientation. The sights, sounds, and smells of the medieval world would be overwhelmingly different from anything they had ever experienced. The first thing that might strike a modern individual is the stark contrast in hygiene and cleanliness. In the 21st century, we take for granted the availability of running water, soap, and antiseptic environments. In the Middle Ages, however, sanitation was rudimentary at best. Streets were often littered with waste, and personal hygiene was not prioritized in the way it is today. The traveler would have to quickly acclimate to these new conditions, or risk illness and infection, which were rampant in the unsanitary environments of medieval towns and villages. The language barrier would present another immediate obstacle. While a time traveler might be familiar with modern English, the language spoken in medieval England, for example, was Middle English, which is vastly different in both vocabulary and pronunciation. Even more challenging, regional dialects varied widely, making communication a potentially insurmountable hurdle. This language barrier would not only hinder basic communication, but could also impede the traveler's ability to access food, shelter, and safety, as misunderstandings could easily lead to conflicts or mistrust. Moreover, the traveler would have to grapple with the differences in social customs and norms. The medieval world was governed by rigid social hierarchies, and an outsider who did not understand or respect these hierarchies could easily find themselves in trouble. For instance, addressing a noble without the proper deference or failing to observe the customs of the church could lead to severe repercussions, ranging from social ostracism to legal punishment. The time traveler would need to quickly learn to navigate these unfamiliar social structures to avoid dangerous situations. Survival skills: adapting to the medieval world. Once the initial shock subsided, the time traveler would face the pressing challenge of survival in a world that lacked the conveniences and technologies of the modern era. Basic needs like food, water, and shelter would become immediate concerns. In the Middle Ages, subsistence farming was the norm, and most people relied on locally grown crops and livestock for sustenance. The traveler, who might be accustomed to grocery stores and packaged foods, would need to learn how to obtain and prepare food using medieval methods. Hunting and foraging might become essential survival skills. In the medieval period, hunting was both a means of acquiring food and a regulated privilege, often reserved for the nobility. However, in times of necessity, a time traveler might be forced to hunt small game or forage for edible plants. Knowledge of medieval farming techniques, such as crop rotation and the use of simple tools like the plough and sickle, would also be invaluable. If the traveler could establish themselves as a competent farmer or craftsman, they might secure a place in a local community. In addition to finding food, the traveler would need to avoid the many dangers that lurked in the medieval world. Disease was a constant threat, with epidemics like the plague periodically decimating populations. Medical knowledge in the Middle Ages was rudimentary, and treatments often did more harm than good. Without access to modern medicine, the traveler would have to rely on natural remedies and hope to avoid infection. Understanding basic principles of hygiene, such as boiling water and avoiding contaminated food, could be life-saving. The traveler would also need to be cautious of physical violence, which was more common in the Middle Ages than in modern times. Bandits roamed the countryside, and disputes between feuding lords often led to skirmishes and battles. Self-defense skills would be crucial, as would an understanding of medieval weapons and armor. A modern person, familiar with firearms, might struggle to wield a sword or bow, but learning to do so could be essential for survival. Technology and knowledge, the modern edge. One of the most intriguing aspects of this thought experiment is the question of how a modern individual might use their advanced knowledge and technological understanding in a medieval context. On one hand, the traveler's knowledge of science, medicine, and engineering could be incredibly valuable. On the other hand, the lack of resources and the primitive state of medieval technology might render much of that knowledge useless. For instance, the traveler might understand the principles of electricity, but without access to materials like copper wire and magnets, they would be unable to create even a simple electric circuit. Similarly, while they might know how to produce antibiotics like penicillin, the absence of the necessary tools and substances could make it impossible to actually do so. The traveler would need to creatively adapt their knowledge to the materials and technologies available in the medieval period. One area where a modern individual might have an immediate impact is in agriculture. Knowledge of crop rotation, irrigation techniques, and soil management could significantly increase agricultural productivity. Introducing concepts like the three-field system or building simple irrigation canals could make the traveler a valuable asset to any medieval community. Similarly, knowledge of basic mechanical principles could lead to the invention of improved tools, such as more efficient plows or windmills. Medicine is another field where the traveler could make a difference, albeit with limitations. While they might not be able to produce modern pharmaceuticals, they could introduce better hygiene practices, such as boiling water before drinking it or cleaning wounds to prevent infection. They might also be able to identify medicinal plants and herbs, improving the effectiveness of traditional remedies. However, they would need to be cautious about introducing new ideas too quickly, as medieval society was deeply superstitious, and any deviation from accepted medical practices could be seen as witchcraft. The traveler's understanding of the natural world could also be a double-edged sword. On one hand, they could make accurate predictions about astronomical events, such as eclipses or the appearance of comets, which might earn them respect or even reverence. On the other hand, such knowledge could also arouse suspicion and fear, particularly if it was perceived as unnatural or heretical. The traveler would need to carefully balance their desire to help with the risk of being misunderstood or persecuted. Social integration, navigating medieval society. Surviving in the Middle Ages would require more than just physical survival skills. The traveler would also need to navigate the complex social structures of the time. Medieval society was hierarchical, with a clear division between the nobility, clergy, and commoners. Each class had its own roles, privileges, and responsibilities, and stepping outside of one's assigned place in society could have serious consequences. If the traveler arrived in a rural village, they would likely find themselves among the peasantry, who made up the vast majority of the population. Peasants were tied to the land and owed labor and produce to the local lord in exchange for protection. Life as a peasant was hard and unrelenting, but it also offered a sense of community and shared purpose. The traveler would need to earn the trust of the villagers by contributing to the community, perhaps by using their knowledge to improve agricultural yields or by offering medical assistance. In a town or city, the traveler might encounter a more diverse population, including merchants, artisans, and members of various guilds. Here, the traveler's modern knowledge could be both an asset and a liability. They might find work as a craftsman or trader, using their understanding of economics and business to gain an edge in the marketplace. However, they would also need to be wary of guild regulations and the potential for conflict with established merchants and artisans who might view them as a threat. Social mobility in the Middle Ages was limited, but not impossible. A traveler with the right skills and connections might be able to rise through the ranks, perhaps even gaining the favor of a noble or royal patron. However, this would require not only competence but also a keen understanding of medieval politics and the ability to navigate courtly intrigues. The traveler would need to be cautious about forming alliances and making enemies, as the wrong move could lead to imprisonment or worse. Religion would play a central role in the traveler's life, as it did for all medieval people. The Church was the most powerful institution in medieval Europe, and its influence extended into every aspect of daily life. The traveler would need to conform to the religious practices of the time, attending Mass, observing holy days, and avoiding any behavior that might be seen as heretical. This could be particularly challenging for a modern person with secular or non-Christian beliefs, who might struggle to reconcile their own worldview with the religious dogma of the time. What could go wrong? The dangers of standing out. While the traveler's modern knowledge and skills might offer advantages, they could also pose significant risks. Standing out too much could attract unwanted attention, and in the medieval world, being different was often dangerous. The medieval mind was deeply superstitious, and anything that could not be easily explained was often attributed to magic or the supernatural. A traveler who demonstrated too much advanced knowledge might be accused of witchcraft or sorcery, with potentially fatal consequences. The traveler would also need to be wary of becoming embroiled in political or religious conflicts. The Middle Ages were marked by frequent wars, both between kingdoms and within them, as well as by intense religious strife. The traveler might find themselves caught up in these conflicts, whether as a pawn in a larger power struggle or as a target of persecution. For example, during the Inquisition, individuals who were perceived as heretics or who held unorthodox beliefs were often subjected to brutal interrogations and executions. The traveler would need to be extremely careful about what they said and did to avoid arousing suspicion. Even if the traveler managed to avoid these dangers, they would still face the challenge of maintaining their mental and emotional well-being in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. The constant threat of violence, disease, and poverty could take a toll on their psyche, leading to feelings of isolation, despair, and hopelessness. The traveler would need to find ways to cope with the stresses of medieval life, perhaps by forming close bonds with the people around them or by finding solace in religious faith. Conclusion. The idea of a 21st-century individual being dropped into the Middle Ages is a fascinating thought experiment that highlights both the challenges and the possibilities of such a scenario. The initial shock of medieval life would be overwhelming, with the traveler facing immediate obstacles related to hygiene, language, and social customs. Survival would require adapting to a world without modern conveniences, relying on ancient skills and knowledge to find food, shelter, and safety. While the traveler's modern understanding of technology and science could offer some advantages, the limitations of medieval resources and the risks of standing out too much could offset these benefits. Ultimately, the traveler's success in the medieval world would depend on their ability to navigate the complex social structures of the time, conform to the prevailing religious beliefs, and avoid attracting unwanted attention. While they might be able to make a positive impact by introducing new ideas or technologies, they would also need to be cautious about the dangers of being perceived as a threat or a heretic. In the end, the journey to the Middle Ages would be a test of both physical and mental resilience, as well as a profound exploration of the differences between our modern world and the distant past. Thanks for listening. Like and comment. And please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious.